Next speaker happens to be one of my best friends. So if I were to have a groomsman, he would be one of them. So I've known him since I was 13 years old. He was a smart ass to me, and because he had his own, insecurities, so he put it out on me. That's what bullies do. But so it's been what, like 20 years now? But we've went away, went away to college. We grew apart, then we came back together briefly, and then away, and then we come back together. We always find each other again somehow. The universe just keeps bringing us back, and now it's more strong than ever. We even went on a road trip to Louisiana to film Fisherman after the BP oil spill together. An amazing experience. He does not do well with camping, and or mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are always after him. He is an inspiration. The reason he's here is not because he's my friend, it's because he is really inspiring. And he's an actor. He's a screenwriter, he's a producer, and he is really, he's never done this before. You would think an actor could come up here, and this is like so easy. But he says it's going to be harder than acting, because in acting you read scripts. Here he's going to have to be authentic and genuine. And every time I'm with him, it's just like I need to really exercise my passion and emotions, and he's very passionate with what he does. He's very true to himself. He doesn't sell himself out, and that's why he's inspiring, and he's going to tell us about his journey on what it means to really live your passion no matter what, and don't settle for less. So with no further ado, we have Rajiv Shah.
What's up, man? Thank you. I got to thank Darius for that very personal and very kind of heartwarming introduction. I do have to defend myself, though, and say that he picked on me as well. So it went both ways. I'm here when Darius, we go way back, as he said, and when he asked me to speak, I was like, okay, well, what do you want me to speak about? And he's like, just be you and talk about your process as an actor and as a screenwriter. And I was like, okay, so what does that exactly mean? And it really kind of came down to being like finding your voice, because the one thing over the years and over my still early career as a screenwriter has been just kind of trusting this voice that I've had. And it's something me and Darius talk about a lot, and that's what sparked for him, starting Bonfire Heights. How do you trust that voice? How do you identify what that is? And I know this room is very diverse. We have a lot of, I know, creative people, some writers. We have some people that are jugglers. We have people that are looking to start their own businesses. And, in these various diverse sort of capacities, there's always this similar thing of the idea and the voice and whatever it is you're passionate about. So my story began in 2005, with this particular passion project I had. It's called Run the Tide. It's a feature film, and it was something that came about because when I had graduated, I majored in theater. So I had this acting degree, and I didn't exactly know what to do with that. I knew I was passionate about it, and I wasn't getting the type of roles that I was particularly passionate about. I wasn't even really getting roles at all at that time, and I didn't have a job, I didn't have these things, but I had this story, and what ended up happening was I was at a particularly low point, and I was even in a relationship that was kind of confining. It was something that my partner at the time was saying, it's great, you can have this as kind of a side thing, and you should really look into maybe going into business school or doing something a little bit more with yourself than following this just kind of creative path. And I was so young, I was like, yeah, maybe there's some truth to that. So I was looking into business schools and different things like that, and it just never felt right to me, and I kept going, I want to tell this story, And even when I told my dad, I was like, hey, I think I want to end up writing a screenplay and I want to tell the story. My dad was like, yeah, that sounds great. You can try to do that exercise and then use your storytelling skills to like become a salesman, you know? So it was always like this diversion, like let's see if we can direct this, you know, kind of crazy sort of, you know, impulse you have into another direction. So I, you know, all of a sudden was confronted. Long story short, I ended up, because of like this advice, which seemed very rational, I ended up not writing my screenplay for about, I'd say about 6 months to a year. And I was very unhappy. It was actually probably one of the harder points in my life where I was like, just every day I would go and I would like try to apply to something, get a job, and I was just not happy with the way things were going. And I realized there was this like voice or this thing inside going, you need to tell it. You need to tell it. And the more I didn't tell it, the bigger it got, and the louder it got, and the more unhappy I got. So at a certain point, I said, okay, I think I just got to put my nose to the grindstone and actually just do it. So what I did was I stopped. Mine was a little backwards. Sometimes they say, you should tell people and get people on your side and stuff. But for me, it was like kind of private, where I didn't tell anybody, because I was like, I didn't really need that kind of almost expectation towards it, or the pressure. Because if I had that pressure, I would have never even began to start with. So I started simple, and I was like, I got to keep it simple. I went and I picked up 2 books on screenwriting, one by Sid Field, the Screenwriter's Workbook, and another one for formatting called the Screenwriter's Bible. And I would tell my girlfriend at the time, I was like, hey, I'm going to go to the library today, and I'm going to go, put some applications in and stuff. And really, I was going back to this like far cubicle to actually open up my screenwriting books, and I was like trying to do the exercises in them and write. And soon enough, like from not having that, like I would just kind of hack it in day out, I finally had a draft of the screenplay. And it was something that I was like, okay, now what do I do with it? I have it here, it's done. I don't know whether it's good or bad. And, funny enough, one of the things is like I set aside it, like during that process, the idea of good and bad. It wasn't really about that. It was more about exploring this thing that was very new to me, and that I, was like wanted to explore and wanted to, kind of put my energy into. And I said, let's forget about good and bad and let's just actually do it. And it was like working day in, day out to do it. So once I finally had it, I started thinking, I was like, I got to send this to somebody that actually is somehow involved in the industry, because if I give it sometimes to people close to me, either I'm going to get like, oh, this is great, but there's not really that perspective of how it would fit, anywhere as far as like making it into a movie. So I ended up hunting down one person through a friend of mine who was a playwright and had done pretty well. And I said, hey, would you, be kind enough to look at this? And he looked at it, read it, and he was like, yeah, it's pretty good, and gave me some notes. And then I took those notes and I went back and I started reworking it, rewriting it, and just kind of started the process that way. And that's where I started breaking out into almost similar thing like this, which is finding, people that are like-minded. And it was an important lesson to me, where I was like, you need to find people that are passionate about similar things, that now you can gravitate. And at that point, I felt like I was at a point then finally where, I had a draft that I felt pretty decent about, that I could start sending it out. So I took that draft, and then, with a little bit of help, I started sending it to competitions. I started sending it to friends who were involved in film that I'd known from acting. And it started actually doing well. It started, placing at these competitions. And through that, I brought a little short film I'd co-wrote and produced to the Los Angeles Asian American Film Festival. And when I was there in 2011, I ended up seeing this short there that I fell in love with, where I was like, this other person's short, it was called Phatakra. And I decided to approach the filmmaker afterwards. I was like, I love your film. Can I send you my script? It's this small character-driven story that's very similar about family and family dysfunction. And he's like, yeah, I'll take a look at it. So I sent it to him, and then we kind of kept meeting and partying during the festival. And he said, yeah, I'll end up, I'd like to direct it. So we ended up coming together and partnering, and shortly after he said he would direct it, he ended up winning the Student Academy Award and then the Directors Guild of America Award. And from that kind of momentum, we started sending it out. And then 2 years later, funny enough, we went back to the Los Angeles Asian American Film Festival this past year, and we ended up getting involved and getting accepted to this thing called Project Catalyst, and then winning the grand jury prize. And from there, we found an agent, and then that agent read it, liked it, and paired us with our now producer, who is a lady named Pilar Savone who produced Django Unchained. And it would have never gotten there if I had never taken that first step by going to a cubicle and writing, even like in secret. And it was one of these things that I realized I was like, you know, going through the process, like whatever sort of outcomes happen, that's like icing on the cake. But really what's important is the process that it takes to get there. And the more you can, like at least for me, I could, you know, kind of separate myself from any sort of results and just focus on telling my story honestly, is what kind of carried me through that process, because it was from 2005 and finally now in 2013 it's gaining a bit of traction. But it was a long sort of process through the way. And you know, it like over the course, the one thing that kept coming up, and I don't know if it's stuff that you guys find that, you know, comes into your lives as well, is fear. And every time like something, even something good would happen, I found that fear was what would come in, and it sounds like it's your best friend. It comes in and it says, you know what, like when I first started, it was like, you know, this is a kind of a good thing that you've got going, but you know, maybe you shouldn't do it because what if it's, you know, really bad, and or what if you know, people don't like it and this kind of stuff. And I had to shut that off. And even when, like now I go through stuff where, you know, our producers are taking it and doing stuff with it, and they're much more experienced than I am, and I start to get afraid. I'm like, what if they try to take it away from me? What if they try to do something I'm not particularly, you know, I like creatively or whatever? And it's part of letting go at that point too. You know, it's become what it's going to become, to let it go and just let it kind of run its course and develop into what it's going to be. So it's one of these things I reflect on, and I always kind of feel like, you know, like being at Bonfire Heights, hearing people that are passionate about their stories or what they're doing, it's like a reaffirming thing, and I try to be around that type of energy, because there's a story that I heard about Michael Jackson. I think I've told a couple of people about it on his last tour. Before he passed away, he was talking to his music producer, and his music producer was kind of talking highly about like all his career accomplishments, and like, you know, how this was going to be a great comeback, and he was kind of, you know, focusing on those kind of successes he'd had. And Michael Jackson went, no, 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 you can't do that. You got to be humble. You got to be humble. And his producer's like, what are you talking about? I mean, you've done all these. He's like, no, no. He's like, I don't do it for that. He's like, you know, I've been given certain talents or gifts. Like mine happens to be dancing and music. So I do it with everything I got. I put myself into it and put as much love as I can into it, because I'm hoping that my gifts, there'll be somebody out in the audience or somebody that'll see it, and it'll help them discover what their gifts are. You know, and really, it's something like as a filmmaker or as an artist or whatever, you're constantly giving, giving, giving. And the hope is that somebody else takes that, or fires off something in them and ignites some flame, some idea, and then they go off and they do something really wonderful themselves. So, you know, it's something that, like, you know, when I talk with Darius, it's a subject we talk about a lot, but it's like, how do you, you know, find that passion? How do you keep it going? And you know, I'm hoping my story, you know, maybe sparks something in you, and you know, you go and you write your script, you go and start your company, you do whatever it is that you need to do, but it's really just staying on that path and allowing fear to happen, going, okay, that's there, and still trusting yourself to go, okay, this is what I want to say.